Left to fend for himself on a deserted highway, Rex, a loyal and fearless dog, faces a journey of hunger, harm and loneliness in search of the one thing he has never abandoned, his family. But when fate confronts him with an imminent tragedy, his courage turns the impossible into reality, saving a life and touching the hearts of everyone around him. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. Here, each video is a journey of overcoming and emotion that you won't want to miss. Rex's ears perked up as the car engine hummed steadily on the open road. He sat in the back seat, his tail wagging with anticipation. Car rides always meant adventure, trips to the park, visits to the countryside, or joyful moments with the children. But this time, the atmosphere felt different. The laughter and warm chatter were absent, replaced by tense silence. As the city lights faded into the rearview mirror, Rex noticed the change. The familiar urban scents were replaced by the sharp smell of dry grass and asphalt. His brown eyes darted toward the driver, Mark, who avoided his gaze. Sitting in the passenger seat, Sarah, usually the first to ruffle his fur, clutched a crumpled tissue. Her quiet sniffles sent an uneasy ripple through Rex's usually jubilant spirit. After what felt like hours, the car slowed. It stopped near an overgrown lot by the edge of an abandoned industrial park. Rex tilted his head, curious. Was this a new place to explore? Before he could process, the car doors clicked open. "Come on, boy," Mark called, his voice trembling as he stepped out of the vehicle. Rex eagerly jumped out, his tail wagging despite the unease brewing in the air. He trotted ahead, expecting a ball or a command. But instead, Mark quickly turned back to the car. The door slammed shut. "Wait," Sarah's voice cracked. "Are we really?" "We don't have a choice," Mark interrupted, his tone heavy with guilt. "We can barely feed ourselves, let alone him." As the engine roared to life, Rex's tail slowed, confusion replacing excitement. The car began to roll forward, leaving him standing alone on the cracked pavement. For a moment, he thought it was a game. His legs sprung into action as he chased the car, barking with every ounce of energy in his lean body. "Wait! Don't leave me!" His mind screamed, but his bark only echoed into the empty street. The car sped up, its taillights shrinking into the horizon. Rex's strong legs, once able to outrun the neighborhood kids, faltered. He stopped, panting, as the last hint of his family disappeared. The silence was deafening. For the first time in his life, Rex was truly alone. He looked around the unfamiliar place, a patchwork of industrial debris, broken fences, and weeds. The sun beat down mercilessly, making the asphalt shimmer. He whined softly, pacing back to the spot where the car had stopped, sniffing the air for a trace of his people. But there was no trace. Rex curled up on the cracked pavement, his ears flattening as his chest heaved. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion. What did I do wrong? Wasn't I good enough? As the shadows lengthened, Rex finally rose to his paws. A primal instinct surged within him: survive. He began to walk, his eyes scanning the horizon for anything that might lead him back to safety, or better yet, to his family. Each step was heavier than the last, but Rex pressed on, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. The sun was relentless, beating down on the desolate landscape as Rex trudged forward. His tongue lolled out, parched and dry, and his once glossy coat was now matted with dust. The occasional sound of distant traffic or a bird's cry gave him brief moments of distraction, but nothing quenched the growing despair in his heart. As the hours stretched into the afternoon, the city's outskirts came into view, a stark contrast of jagged concrete and fading graffiti against the soft glow of the encroaching dusk. Rex's nose twitched, picking up faint traces of food mingled with decay. Driven by hunger, he followed the trail, his paw pads aching on the hot asphalt. The smell led him to a sprawling junkyard, where heaps of twisted metal and scattered trash lay forgotten. Rex hesitated at the entrance. The air reeked of rotten oil, but the gnawing ache in his stomach pushed him forward. Inside, he sniffed around the piles, his senses on high alert. A torn fast food wrapper caught his attention, and he pawed at it eagerly. It was empty. His stomach growled in protest. He moved on, weaving through the debris, his body instinctively crouched low, wary of sudden movements. From a distance, a sharp bark echoed through the yard, causing Rex to freeze. His ears twitched, locating the source of the sound. Two stray dogs appeared from behind a pile of rusted car parts, their coats ragged and their eyes fierce. The larger one, a hulking mutt with jagged scars across his muzzle, bared his teeth in a menacing growl. Rex backed away slowly, his heart pounding. He wasn't here to fight, but the junkyard was clearly their territory, and they weren't about to share. The smaller dog lunged forward, snapping its jaws mere inches from Rex's face. Instinct took over. Rex turned and bolted, his legs carrying him as fast as they could manage. The two dogs gave chase, their growls echoing in the confined space. Rex weaved through the piles of trash, leaping over broken furniture and skidding across loose gravel. He could hear their panting breaths closing in. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm him, Rex spotted a gap beneath a collapsed fence. Without hesitation, he dove for it, squeezing his lean body through the narrow space. The jagged edge of the fence scraped his side, but he didn't stop. On the other side, he scrambled to his feet and kept running until the sound of pursuit faded. He finally slowed, his legs trembling as he collapsed onto a patch of overgrown grass. His chest heaved, and his ribs rose and fell in sharp relief under his dusty fur. A thin line of blood traced down his side where the fence had cut him, but he was too exhausted to care. As the sky deepened into twilight, Rex lay motionless, staring up at the encroaching stars. Hunger gnawed at him, and the pain in his side throbbed, but his thoughts drifted to his family. He could see them so clearly, Mark's warm hands scratching behind his ears, Sarah laughing as she tossed a ball for him, the children racing him across the backyard. Where were they now? Did they miss him? Did they even care? Rex closed his eyes, willing himself to rest, though the ground was hard and the air carried a chill. He would need every ounce of strength for the next day. Deep inside, the hope of finding them still burned, faint but stubborn, driving him forward despite the odds stacked against him. For now, he slept under the stars, a lone figure in the vast expanse of the city's forgotten edges. The morning sun broke through a thin layer of clouds, casting a pale light over the quiet streets. Rex stirred from his makeshift bed in the overgrown grass, his body stiff and his wounds still tender. Hunger clawed at his stomach, a constant reminder that he needed to keep moving. With cautious steps, Rex ventured deeper into the city. The cracked pavement and abandoned lots soon gave way to the signs of life, faint chatter from distant pedestrians, the occasional honk of a car, and the smell of food wafting from street vendors. His nose twitched, and his ears perked up at the promise of something edible. Navigating through the urban maze, Rex spotted a small food cart parked near a bustling corner. A man handed out tacos to a line of customers, and Rex's mouth watered at the sight. He approached hesitantly, staying low to the ground, his tail wagging slightly as he sniffed the air. A piece of tortilla fell to the ground, and Rex darted forward to grab it. The man running the cart noticed him immediately. "Shoo! Get out of here," he barked, waving a towel. Startled, Rex bolted across the street, narrowly avoiding a car that screeched to a halt. The driver leaned out, shouting curses, but Rex was already out of sight, hiding in the shadows of an alleyway. His heart raced as he crouched behind a dumpster, waiting for the commotion to die down. The alley was quieter, but not entirely safe. The air was thick with the acrid scent of trash and damp concrete. Rex's sharp ears picked up a faint growl, and he turned to see two lean, muscular dogs emerging from the far end. Their yellowed teeth glinted as they snarled, their hackles raised in clear warning. Rex's instincts kicked in. He backed away, keeping his body low and his eyes fixed on the dogs. The larger one, a pit bull mix with scars covering its muzzle, stepped forward, teeth bared. The smaller one circled to Rex's side, cutting off his escape route. A low rumble rose from Rex's throat as he tried to stand his ground, though he knew he was outmatched. His wound stung as he tensed, ready to defend himself. The larger dog lunged first, jaws snapping. Rex dodged to the side, his muscles burning with the effort. The second dog pounced, and Rex swung his body to block the attack, but its teeth grazed his shoulder, leaving a shallow cut. He let out a sharp bark, a mix of pain and defiance. The fight was chaotic, with Rex weaving and dodging as best as he could. He managed to nip at one dog's leg, causing it to yelp and retreat momentarily. But the pit bull was relentless, forcing Rex into a corner. Panting heavily, Rex's mind raced. He couldn't overpower them, not in his weakened state. His eyes darted around the alley, searching for a way out. That's when he noticed a stack of wooden crates against the wall. Summoning the last of his energy, Rex leapt onto the crates, scrambling up to the ledge of a low roof. The dogs barked furiously below, jumping and snapping at the air, but they couldn't reach him. Rex stood on shaky legs, staring down at his aggressors. His body was trembling, his wound bleeding again, but he was safe, for now. As the dogs lost interest and trotted away, Rex collapsed onto the roof. His vision blurred with exhaustion, and his breaths came in ragged gasps. He licked his wounded shoulder weakly, the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth. Above him, the city buzzed with life, indifferent to his struggles. Yet, as Rex lay there under the open sky, something in him refused to give up. He had survived another day, and that was enough. For now. Rex awoke as the last streaks of sunlight disappeared behind the city skyline. His body ached with exhaustion, and the wounds from his earlier fight stung with every movement. The rooftop he'd found wasn't much of a haven, but it had kept him safe through the day. Now, under the cover of darkness, he needed to find food and shelter before his strength gave out completely. Carefully, he climbed down from the roof using a rickety fire escape, his paws slipping slightly on the rusted metal. Back on the ground, the city felt quieter, but its hidden dangers remained. Rex's nose twitched as he picked up faint scents of something edible, leading him through narrow alleyways toward a cluster of abandoned buildings. He pushed through an open doorway, finding himself in what seemed to be an old warehouse. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of mildew and decaying wood. Dim light filtered through broken windows, illuminating the outlines of scattered debris. It was eerily silent, save for the faint rustle of movement deeper inside. Rex's ears perked, his body tensing. He took cautious steps forward, his claws clicking softly against the concrete floor. As he rounded a corner, he saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him from the shadows. He froze, his hackles rising instinctively. A faint meow broke the silence. Rex's muscles relaxed as a scrawny, orange tabby cat stepped into the light. Its fur was matted, and one ear was torn, but its eyes held a cautious curiosity. The cat hissed lightly, arching its back, but Rex stood his ground, lowering his head to show he meant no harm. The two animals regarded each other for a moment, their silent standoff broken when the cat cautiously approached. It sniffed at Rex's injured shoulder before retreating with a wary flick of its tail. Rex followed its movements as it disappeared into a corner, where scraps of paper and an old blanket formed a makeshift nest. Rex hesitated but eventually lay down a few feet away, his body too weary to continue searching for another refuge. The cat watched him for a moment, then curled back into its nest. Though no words were exchanged, there was an unspoken truce between them. As the hours passed, the faint sounds of the city outside became a distant hum. For the first time in days, Rex felt a sliver of safety in the solitude of the warehouse. Rex woke to a faint scratching sound nearby. He lifted his head, groggy but alert, to see the tabby pawing at an overturned trash bin. The cat managed to pull out a piece of stale bread, batting it toward Rex. It wasn't much, but the gesture was clear, an offering of peace. Grateful, Rex sniffed at the bread before carefully nibbling at it. It was dry and hard, but it eased the gnawing hunger in his belly. When he finished, he glanced at the cat, who had curled up nearby, its eyes half closed but still watching him. The two shared a quiet camaraderie throughout the day. Rex, though weak, ventured further into the warehouse, sniffing out corners for anything useful. He found a small puddle of rainwater near a broken window and drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing his dry throat. By evening, the cat led him to a back room where the air was cooler, and the floor was covered in old fabric remnants. Rex lay down, his wounds throbbing but his heart slightly lighter. The cat curled up close to him, their bodies sharing warmth in the dim light. For the first time since being abandoned, Rex didn't feel entirely alone. Though the road ahead was uncertain, the fragile alliance he'd formed with the tabby gave him a flicker of hope. Tomorrow, he'd move on, but tonight, he would rest, knowing he had a companion in his silent fight for survival. Rex awoke to a chill in the air, his body stiff from the cold concrete floor. The tabby cat, his silent companion, was gone, leaving only faint pawprints in the dusty ground. Rex sniffed the air, searching for its scent, but the cat had vanished into the labyrinth of the warehouse. A pang of loneliness struck him, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of urgency. He couldn't stay here. His instincts urged him to move, though his legs were heavy, and his wounds still stung. Gathering what little strength he had, Rex padded toward the exit, the morning light spilling through the cracks in the warehouse walls. Outside, the city seemed quieter. The usual hum of traffic and chatter was subdued, as if the world had slowed down. Rex followed his nose, sniffing for familiar scents. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a pull, a faint, unshakable sense that he was getting closer to something important. As he walked, the landscape began to shift. The industrial grime and towering buildings gave way to smaller homes and overgrown lots. The air smelled different here, earthy, with faint traces of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. It was a scent Rex knew well. This was his neighborhood. His heart raced as he recognized landmarks, the corner bakery where the children had once snuck him treats, the park where he had chased balls under the summer sun, and finally, the narrow street that led to his home. Or what used to be his home. Rex paused at the edge of the yard, his eyes scanning the house. The once pristine lawn was now overgrown, weeds sprouting through the cracks in the driveway. The flowers Sarah used to tend with care were wilted, their colors faded into browns and grays. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn, and the familiar warmth that had once radiated from the house was gone. Rex approached cautiously, his tail low. He sniffed the air, searching for the comforting sense of his family, but all he found was dust and decay. His paws left faint tracks in the dirt as he circled the yard, peering through the gaps in the fence. The back porch, where the children had often played and tossed toys for him to fetch, was eerily silent. Rex climbed the steps, his claws clicking against the wood, and stopped at the door. He nudged it with his nose, but it didn't budge. He sat down, staring at the door, his ears perked for any sign of life. A memory surfaced, the sound of Sarah's voice calling his name, the children's laughter echoing through the house. His tail wagged faintly at the thought, but reality quickly set in. The house was empty. They were gone. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Rex lowered himself onto the porch. His body was exhausted, but his mind raced. Had they left for good? Would they ever return? Just as despair began to take hold, a faint noise reached his ears, the high-pitched giggle of a child. Rex's head shot up, his ears swiveling to catch the sound. It came from the house next door, where a family was playing in their backyard. The laughter was different from what he remembered, but it stirred something inside him. Driven by a spark of hope, Rex rose to his feet and trotted toward the fence. He peeked through a gap in the wood, watching the family. A small girl ran after a ball, her father cheering her on. Rex whined softly, the scene tugging at his heart. He wanted to be a part of it, to feel that connection again. But he knew it wasn't his place. With a heavy sigh, he turned away, padding back to his old home. As the night fell, Rex curled up on the porch, his head resting on his paws. The world around him was dark and still, but deep inside, a faint sense of purpose burned on. Somehow, he would find them. He had to. The dawn broke with a pale, muted light, the kind that foretells an incoming storm. Rex stirred on the porch of his old home, his body stiff and aching from the chill of the night. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he pushed it aside. Something about the morning felt different, tense, as if the air itself held its breath. He wandered around the yard, sniffing aimlessly, when a sound made him freeze. It was faint at first, a child's cry, muffled and distant. Rex's ears perked, swiveling to locate the source. The cry grew louder, urgent, and filled with panic. His heart raced as he turned toward the noise, his instincts snapping into action. The sound led him to the neighboring yard, where the cries became clearer. Through the wooden slats of the fence, Rex saw a child, no more than 3 years old, flailing in a backyard swimming pool. The water splashed violently as the boy's tiny arms struggled to keep him afloat, his face barely above the surface. Without hesitation, Rex darted toward the gate, but it was locked. He circled the fence, his movements frantic, until he spotted a gap beneath the planks. Digging furiously with his paws, Rex widened the hole just enough to squeeze through. As soon as Rex entered the yard, his eyes locked on the boy. The pool's clear water reflected the morning light, but the child's desperate struggle shattered the serene image. Rex sprinted toward the edge, his legs moving on pure adrenaline despite his exhaustion. With a powerful leap, he dove into the water. The cold shock of the pool gripped his body, but he pushed through, paddling furiously toward the boy. The child's cries had weakened, and his head dipped below the surface just as Rex reached him. Rex clamped his jaws gently around the boy's shirt collar, his teeth careful not to harm him. Using all the strength left in his body, Rex kicked against the water, dragging the child toward the edge. His legs burned, and his lungs felt like they might burst, but he refused to stop. Finally, his front paws found the pool's ledge. With a monumental effort, Rex heaved the boy onto the concrete, his own body collapsing beside him. The child coughed and sputtered, expelling water from his lungs before bursting into weak, frightened cries. The commotion had drawn attention. A woman's scream pierced the air as the boy's mother rushed out of the house, her face a mask of terror. "Leo," she cried, dropping to her knees beside the child and cradling him tightly. The boy clung to her, his sobs muffled against her shoulder. It was then that she noticed Rex, lying motionless beside the pool. His chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths, his fur soaked and matted. Her hand trembled as she reached out to him, her voice breaking. "You saved him. You saved my baby." Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the mother's screams. Murmurs spread through the crowd as they pieced together what had happened. Some took out their phones, snapping photos and recording videos of the drenched, exhausted dog who had become an unlikely hero. Among the gathering crowd, a man pushed his way to the front, his face pale with disbelief. It was Mark. He froze as his eyes met Rex's, the recognition hitting him like a physical blow. "Rex," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The dog's ears flicked weakly at the sound of his name, and his tail gave a faint wag. Mark dropped to his knees beside him, running his hands over Rex's trembling body. "Oh, buddy. I'm so sorry," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Sarah appeared moments later, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. "Mark. It's him," she whispered, her hands covering her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as she knelt beside them, her fingers brushing against Rex's wet fur. As the boy's mother called for an ambulance, Mark and Sarah stayed by Rex's side, their hands never leaving him. Neighbors murmured words of awe and admiration, but Mark couldn't focus on anything except the dog he had abandoned, the dog who had come back and saved a life. "I don't deserve you," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. Rex, though too weak to move, looked up at him with eyes full of forgiveness, his tail thumping faintly against the ground. The paramedics arrived soon after, tending first to the boy before turning their attention to Rex. The mother pleaded with them to help him, her gratitude overflowing. "He saved my son," she repeated, tears in her eyes. "He saved my son." As Rex was lifted onto a stretcher, Mark and Sarah walked beside him, their hands resting gently on his side. Rex's eyes fluttered shut, his body too drained to stay awake any longer. But he wasn't afraid. For the first time in days, he felt safe. He had found his family again. Rex awoke to the gentle hum of machines and the sterile scent of antiseptic. His body was wrapped in warm blankets, and the dull ache of his wounds had lessened. He blinked slowly, his vision adjusting to the soft light of the veterinary clinic. Voices murmured nearby, and he recognized them instantly, Mark and Sarah. "You're going to be okay, buddy," Mark said softly, leaning over the cot where Rex lay. His eyes were red, and his face carried the weight of guilt and gratitude. Sarah stood beside him, her hand resting gently on Rex's paw. The veterinarian approached, her expression calm but serious. "He's stable for now," she said, addressing Mark and Sarah. "But his body is weak, and he's been through a lot. It's a miracle he made it this far." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she stroked Rex's fur. "He didn't just make it. He saved that little boy. He's a hero," she whispered. Mark nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "We owe him everything. And we'll do whatever it takes to help him." Rex was discharged later that day, still weak but responsive. Mark carried him carefully to the car, whispering reassurances as they made the journey back to their new home. The small apartment was a far cry from the house they once had, but it was filled with warmth and love. They laid Rex on a soft bed in the living room, surrounded by blankets and familiar scents. The children, who had been told about Rex's return, sat quietly beside him, their small hands gently patting his head. "We missed you, Rex," one of them said, their voice barely above a whisper. Rex's tail wagged faintly, a flicker of his old energy returning. The following days were filled with care and attention. Mark and Sarah took turns feeding Rex, cleaning his wounds, and ensuring he was comfortable. But despite their efforts, it became clear that Rex's body was failing. The weeks of hardship had taken their toll, and his once boundless energy was now a quiet, fading light. One evening, as the sun set in hues of orange and pink, Rex lay surrounded by his family. The children had fallen asleep beside him, their small forms curled against his side. Mark and Sarah sat close, their hands resting on his fur. "Thank you," Mark said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for coming back. For everything." Rex's eyes met Mark's, and in that moment, there was no need for words. The bond they shared was unbroken, stronger than ever. Rex's tail wagged one last time, a soft thump against the blankets, before his eyes closed peacefully. The family buried Rex in a quiet corner of the park where he had loved to run. Mark and Sarah planted a tree over his resting place, a symbol of life and renewal. The children often visited, bringing flowers and sitting beneath the shade, telling stories about their loyal friend. Word of Rex's heroism spread throughout the neighborhood. The family received countless messages of support, and many people shared how inspired they were by his unwavering loyalty and courage. Years later, the family would often gather under the tree, now tall and strong, its branches reaching toward the sky. They would laugh and cry as they remembered Rex, not just as a dog, but as a protector, a hero, and an irreplaceable part of their family. Though Rex was gone, his spirit remained, woven into the fabric of their lives. His story became a reminder of the power of forgiveness, the depth of loyalty, and the unconditional love that only a dog could give. Rex had found his way home, and in doing so, he had given his family a gift they would cherish forever. If you liked this story and want more content like this, leave a like, share it with someone you know will be moved by it, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Together, we will explore inspiring stories and moments that touch the heart. Until the next video.